Yeah, so there's two reasons I reached out really.
Mm,
I really like speaking to people on the podcast who've written music books, and obviously, as a music journalist that hasn't written a 33 and third book, I
yeah,
kind of hate you.
fair enough.
Um,
Hmm.
because it's what we all want to do. But also, Faith is a record that I've always been kind of fascinated by. So
Yeah,
I sort of thought, well, who better to talk about that record with than yourself? So,
wonderful. Yes.
so I thought we'd probably start with the. I guess I'd probably start with the process. Really,
Yeah.
why did you want to write about Faith?
Um, well, it was an album that always resonated with me. Well, Wham did really because they kind of go back to my childhood. Wham were one of the first big pop bands to emerge after I started buying records. So I guess my first single was a Dixie Midnight Runners record towards the end of '82. Jackie Wilson Said, which came out about a month before Wham emerged on Top of the Pops, at least. They'd been around for Wham Rap before, but I knew nothing about that. If it wasn't in the top 40, I wouldn't have had a clue. So Young Guns Go For It appears on Top of the Pops when I'm 10 and 6 months, and immediately strike a chord with me. It's joyful, it's lively, it's just pure pop. And
How old are you at that point?
so I'm 10. I'm enjoying a term at boarding school,
Right.
or rather not enjoying a term
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
boarding school.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the only term I ever spent there because my father was taking too long getting out of the Royal Air Force for us to be able to move to our new house.
Right. Cheers,
But
Dad.
yeah, thanks. But I digress. So there you are. I'm kind of hooked in from the start of Wham's success, and buying absolutely everything, all the singles, all the George Michael early proto solo singles, and then so I'm with him when Faith comes out, and also he comes from the same town. I was living in Bushy as well at the time when I wasn't at boarding school, so we had that kind of
Yeah.
kinship
Yeah.
there. He didn't even know about, but I did. Um,
Yeah,
and
I find myself rooting for any band that spent more than about 10 minutes in Doncaster, like
yeah, quite.
regardless of whether I like them or not.
Yeah. So, but I mean, if you, so it was a favourite straight away. Faith was, but now we're talking 30 years after, 33 years after that. There was a more cynical side to it, I guess. It wasn't the first 33 and a third I'd pitched in the 10, 12 years that they'd had those open calls. I guess I tried it with Pet Shop Boys Introspective about 10 years earlier. And a couple of years after that, I tried with Corner Shops when I was born for the seventh time. And, you know, bands I loved and albums I loved. The pictures I guess they were kind of meandering stories about the album, about why I liked it, that kind of thing, without really getting to the nub of why it'd be an interesting book. And I think a few years after that, it kind of dawned on me why. Well, that would be one reason why Bloomsbury or 33 and a third wouldn't have been interested in it because they didn't have some sort of overarching story. But also, you need to have US success really for them to cut through with the publishers.
Right, right.
And so that was one of the reasons why. So I was looking for an album I loved and an album that I knew would find an audience there with the publisher. So there's an edge to it like that.
I have seen the criteria that is involved to pitch books for that series, and
Mm.
it's thorough. But I sort of imagine that there's this panel of this panel of like men in sort of druid-esque cloaks
Yeah.
that look at them all on some sort of stone tablet table, and that's how they make the decisions, right? This is
Yeah, well,
exactly
that's exactly it. Yeah, yeah. They told me all
exactly
that
that.
afterwards. Yeah,
Right, right,
they
cool,
let me
cool.
see the pictures of the fires and all that. Yeah, yeah.
One of the interesting things about Faith is that you know, George talked about really how he, his frustration that, or ambition really, that he
Mm,
wanted to be talked about in the same breath as Prince and Michael Jackson, and that maybe he wasn't like embarrassed by Wham, but he was like frustrated, by the sort of perception of them as like a teeny bopper band.
yes.
Like, how did you feel when Wham split up? Was that? I mean, I imagine you were at an age that was quite a seismic thing.
Yeah, it was. So they split up. Well, they announced the split. I was 13, I guess. So it was just after I was 14 they split, and it was huge. But he was clever about it, wasn't he? He'd already laid the groundwork for his solo career, so he knew he wasn't going anywhere. And anyone who was paying any attention knew that Andrew, bless him, for all he mattered for the Wham image and to give George the confidence he needed to do what he did, that it wasn't going to change. Really, the quality of the output, so to speak. So I wasn't worried about what was going to happen next there. And also, George Michael always had a very strong sense of event, of making a big thing out of every record, out of what he was going to do. And we were given so much warning about Wham splitting. It was maybe about 6 months before the final concert that he'd announced what the single was going to be and how it was going to be a gatefold double single called The Final Parts 1 and 2, and you felt like you were along for the ride, and it was a big event to celebrate.
I mean, you can fill in some gaps for me here because I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit younger than you. So Wham were, I mean, I wasn't really bothered about music at the time. I was kicking a football around. Wham was like a band that like the girls in the playground liked, and therefore I had no interest in them at all. But at what point do people look at Wham and go, oh, actually, there is this amazing songwriter as part of that duo? Like, at what point does almost like kind of credibility come to the way that George is perceived?
At what point in the career? In his career, yeah. I think it's Careless Whisper that's is the one that had the seismic effect that made people sit up and take notice. That was one that reached beyond the teeny boppers, whatever, which I I guess I was, and suddenly had grown-ups paying attention, or serious artists. That's talking to people in the book. They make a big thing. A few people make a big thing of that, obviously, but also about how. There's Paul Gambaccini was one of the people I spoke to because he had overarching view of his career, and was a friend. But he was also very interested in the US charts and US artists, and they were talking to him about George Michael at that point. He was telling me about Ray Parker Jr. marveling at Guilty Feet Have No Rhythm, and saying what a lyric. And and also they're all, his peers are all marveling over George's soul voice and his blue-eyed soul voice and his ability to cut through in that direction. And so I think that was it. I mean, Wham carried on clearly simultaneously with the pop hits, but they I don't know, they sort of a classic feel even then. Freedom comes a couple of months after Careless Whisper doing its Motown thing, so it's cutting through the generations as well. I mean, that's it. It's Careless Whisper that's the catalyst that makes people think he's a serious artist.
I mean, the framing of Faith is genius, with the opening with the kind of orchestral version of Freedom. I think is just like so meta. It's amazing. Yeah. But I think it's like kind of I don't know what it was like at the time, but kind of like knowing kind of how George's life kind of played out, like it's sort of impossible not to say that there's a lot of Faith which is filthy. Yeah. Was that obvious at the time?
Yeah, and hugely disapproved of. Even in the contemporary pop press, Smash Hits, for instance, they weren't happy at all with how smutty George has become of late. That's one of the quotes from a review, and that's that's from I Want Your Sex. I guess I don't think there's anything really before that. Yeah, I think that's putting I Want Your Sex and then Faith the single, which obviously mentions your body and things like that. It was clearly crossing a line in a young pop artist. But then you got the moral outrage as well. You got your Mary Whitehouses putting up their skirts at I Want Your Sex's message and lyrics, although that wasn't the message that George was claiming he was putting across. He wasn't just saying go out there and shag everyone. No, it was a safe sex song.
Right, right.
That's what he claimed afterwards, anyway.
Was anyone trying to out him, or was?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't reading the tabloids myself at the time, but they were. You know, looking back, they all were. There's all sorts of there are hints, and I mean, and of his contemporaries, Boy George was trying to do it the entire time. You know, in his little catty asides, little hints, that sort of thing. But nothing ever stuck, as far as I'm aware. You know, I mean, I was, you know, putting myself back at that point. I'm reading Smash Hits, and I'm reading Record Mirror. So Smash Hits might hint at it, but it's just having a bit of fun with it, and Record Mirror wouldn't be touching that angle at all. Was interviewing him seriously about the messages behind "I Want Your Sex" and etc.
Yeah, yeah. How important is the title track? I mean, it is a banger.
Yeah. Well, I think it totally reframes him. It's not something you'd put in a synth pop mold, which I guess is where he was before. You know, it's
like Bo Diddley. That really.
It is, yeah, and you know, and he takes the image as well. So he's got his rock and roller image and leaning against the wall. It's a jukebox and everything like that. He's capturing that angle, that audience, and it's. It certainly made people sit up and take notice. I think that was a review I was quoted on Twitter the other day. There was it was reviewed in Record Mirror, that single, and it was reviewed by That Petrol Emotion, you know, the older spin-off group from the Undertones, and who are just, you know, you can even just reading their words there, you can see they're sitting there open mouth going, "This is George Michael," you know. It's not what we expected at all, but it's. Yeah, but I like what you're saying about, you know, the sort of the meta intro to it with the organ. You know, it's a nice touch of splitting with the past and setting himself out of the future, although not deliberate, I don't think. I mean, the organ bit. There's a good story in the book. One people should read the book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to front end this and back end this with buy the book. So
yeah.
Don't worry if there's any spoilers.
I won't try to sell. That's I mean, that's his keyboard player, Chris Cameron, who's just at that point having a chat with him in the studio, saying, just an aside, you know, do you know your song Freedom? Have you ever thought? I've always thought the chords are like Mahlerian, you know, just like Gustav Mahler, that kind of feel. And he starts playing it to demonstrate, playing it slowly there on his keyboard. It's been recorded at the time, and had no idea until he heard the finished record that George had listened to this and gone, "That's a good idea," you know, just slap that on the start.
Oh no, I love that.
Yeah, those are lovely things. Yeah.
How I've got to say on Faith, I worked at Kerrang for too long to not have kind of had that song kind of ruined by Limp Bizkit.
Sure,
that was something that was on the stereo far too much for my liking. How important is MTV as well? I always kind of think that music released in this era. I mean, George was kind of built for it, really, wasn't he?
Yeah, totally. I mean, he was. So he's hooked up with that from the very start. He's very, very conscious of image, and fairly consistent with image as well. You know, I mean, if you're looking back at the early Wham videos, and he's even back then he's cavorting around in a leather jacket with nothing on underneath, you know, and just the same as he is on the Faith sleeve. You know, that's how he's portraying himself. And was it the video for Faith? That look, that was him at the time. The director was saying that George just dressed like that the entire time. He just went around with his suede winkle pickers and tight jeans, leather jacket, and shades. That was his uniform for daily life. But yeah, I mean that's how you cut through in the States at that point, for sure. In the mid '80s, you needed a strong image. You needed the fun videos. They needed to get across to people that way, and he wrote that.
My favourite song on the record is "Hard Day," and I texted a friend of mine who's who's like an 80s pop aficionado, just half an hour ago, and I said,
Yeah.
I said, I have no idea who does the rap on this song, and then I did a bit of reading, and it's him, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like a sort of Prince Camille kind of vibe.
Exactly it. Yes, that was what I was putting to the engineer, Chris Porter, who, he's, although George Michael's the producer on the record, Chris Porter as his engineer is, he's the guy on the knobs, and helping him realize his vision on that. And he said that George was extremely influenced by Prince at the time. Well, he not so much wanted to be him, but certainly wanted to compete on that level, and Prince as an auteur, as there at the cutting edge, is making sounds that everyone wants to emulate. And so although Chris Porter says that George doesn't come in going, I want to sound like Prince, he knows that's where he's coming from on that. And that's what they say. He says about that Camille type bit. It's on a Mitsubishi sampler that it's very sped up and then down again. No, they recorded it slow and then sped up after that.
Wow.
But yeah, that's what he's going for, and that kind of dry feel. And Hard Day is the one song on the album that is all George. It's like a Prince approach as well as a Prince sound.
I love that song, absolutely.
Yeah.
When I relayed that to my friend, I said, "Oh, apparently it's George." It blew his mind. My other favourite is "Looking at Your Hands," which is a co-write, isn't it? And I don't know anything about David Austin. Who was David Austin?
He was his other best pal. So from way back, he was in early bands with George and Andrew back in Bushy, and he when they split the executive and they were trying to get Wham together. David. Well, I mean, it took a while. As far as when you're a teenager, you want everything to happen all at once, And I think for him, it was taking far too long to come together. And he headed off on a jaunt to the Middle East, and he said to George, "This is never going to happen," So I'm off, But by the time he came back from his round the world trip, they were on Top of the Pops. Well, they had their Top of the Pops booking, and he was there. And so David's he's there, playing guitar on Young Guns on Top of the Pops. He's there on later things like Bad Boys the next year. I was looking at MTV, had a thing last night, a sort of Wham countdown, and I was obviously watching that. And I'd forgotten, but he's in the Edge of Heaven video. So right at the end, even though he'd gone off and tried to have a solo career in the meantime, David Austin had, which was never coming together. But he was always on the fringes. There's when Andrew Ridgeley had his nose job in about 84, when he turned up in the press with the great bandages across his nose, across his forehead, typical post nose job look. They said, no, he hasn't had a nose job. We're in a bar. It was all got a bit raucous, and David was there, and he's swinging the champagne ice bucket around, and it hit Andrew in the face. So he's had to have an op. He's always there in the story. And I mean, he's still there now. He's basically runs the commercial side of the estate, works with Sony Music on all the re-releases. He's been a close friend, good pal, and he's looking after his legacy.
I tell you what he doesn't have. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page.
Oh, that's a shame. Yeah, well, I'm working on that, but but to bring it around to Look at Your Hands, it's a co-write really, because that was going to be the next attempt at breaking David Austin as a solo star. George was very loyal to his pal. He's always trying to get him out there. Right. Loyal to an extent, in the sense that they're working on this track. And I mean, when Rolling Stone came to visit to see how George was getting along with the solo stuff, David Frick's in the studio with him talking about, and George is working on David Austin's solo single. I don't know how this will turn out. And then a couple of weeks later, George has nabbed it for himself and has taken it over to Denmark to work on for the album. But,
I still think, knowing what I know about the music business, that's fairly loyal.
It is. I mean, that's another thing. I mean, all this obviously is it's peppered across the book. But there's Paul Gummersall, who's one of the engineers, one of Chris Porter's assistants. He said, apparently David was really narked off about this, but I wouldn't have been. He made 100 times more out of it, just being a co-writer on the album. But,
yeah, totally.
maybe still dreamed of solo superstardom.
It's kind of wild. George is obviously cock a hoop that it goes to. That he's a white solo artist and it goes to #1 in the Black Albums chart, the Billboard Black Albums chart. Kind of wild, that to me. I don't know whether that's because we live in an age where it feels like we see so much things through race.
Yeah.
But was that significant in the 80s, or I imagine I can understand his excitement about that, but I guess what did that mean at the time?
Obviously, there was serious demarcations, particularly in the States. Having all those charts, it is a kind of segregation, really. Although it's not like black artists obviously weren't banned from the mainstream charts, but they obviously felt that the Billboard powers obviously felt that it needed its niche. Well, the way he would tell it at the time, George Michael, he thought it was ridiculous that, do I have to be black to be in the black charts? Which was a kind of fundamental misunderstanding, really, of what it was. I think, but he wanted to cross over to that audience. He wanted to be in that. That was the way to cross over to that audience, or chicken and egg scenario. Anyway, if you were crossing over, you'd get into that chart, but it pushes itself. But he thought it was ridiculous, but there's a kind of disingenuous quality to that, really. He just wanted to break through to those audiences. He didn't feel like I obviously never met him, couldn't say for sure, but I don't think he really believed that he had a right to be there as such. He just didn't want those barriers.
Yeah, no, totally. No, there's a quote that's in Jet magazine where he says that the new music is more overtly sexual, more black, which is one of those statements that is really well intentioned, but you can sort of just pull it apart all day long. But different times.
That's right.
Do you feel like George got better with his solo work, or do you feel like this is the peak?
I think on a personal basis, I probably prefer "Listen Without Prejudice" overall as a record. I think it just speaks to me a little bit more. I don't know, maybe I think it's my. Maybe I prefer a sad tune to an overtly happier one, but and "Listen Without Prejudice" is definitely strewn with those. But I think after that, I think he doesn't improve as such. Old is a great album, but it's a particular type. I'm coming at this from a very personal angle, to be honest, because for me it's a little too sleek and tasteful, rather than as out there as Faith is, or as inspired melodically as I find "Listen Without Prejudice" to be. But there are reasons for that.
Hell of a debut.
Yeah.
Well, that was lovely. I feel like I learned loads there. What are you working on now? Can you tell me?
Well, I have a day job, unfortunately, which is working for a large TV and broadband company running their promotions. So that takes up a lot of my time.
That sounds like it pays for way more than music journalism.
Well, yeah, that's the problem, really. I had to make that decision a few years back when the bottom was obviously dropping out of getting a lot of money for freelance music journalism. But
it drops. Still it drops.
Still it does. But I've got I have an idea for another book. But it's not that I feel it's a confidential idea because I haven't presented it to anyone yet. But I'm not sure if it's an incredibly stupid idea. So I prefer no one to tell me that it's a stupid idea before I've worked on it. You know what I mean?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think there's a really thin line between stupid ideas and genius ideas, you know what I mean? So I would I'd flesh it out and see where you get to.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you,
Matthew. Thanks so much for your time, man.
It's been a joy. Thank you.